Our story really begins on April 28th. We had a little red pickup that we lovingly referred to as Little Red. It was a 78 Toyota pickup, and Trenton, our 16-year-old son, had inherited this little pickup. And so on a windy spring day with the dust blowing, he wanted to go to the canyon with his friend, and we're like, okay, but be back in 30 minutes. And 15 minutes later, he calls us and he goes, I wrecked the pickup. It rolled over and they're calling the ambulance. So we rushed out to the canyon to see what we could do or what needed to be done. They had already taken him to the ER and doing a CT scan, they wanted to make sure his spleen was okay. So they came back and the doctor goes, no, his spleen is fine, but there's a tumor on his liver that is about the size of a softball. Did another CT scan, did some blood work, and they're like, no, it's fine, don't worry about it. About a month later, Mike and Trenton were in Haiti for a mission trip, and I get a phone call from the oncologist, and she said, let me tell you that we've looked at the scan again, and we think there's something that we missed the first time, and so we want you to come back down. Another radiologist had looked at it, and everyone decided it definitely was a tumor on his liver. It was the size of a softball, and it would require taking about half of his liver. Surgery was scheduled for July 17th. We went down and we didn't know. We had 20 plus friends with us sitting in the waiting room. We didn't realize that in the operating room, Trenton had lost almost 10 pints of blood, and he almost lost his life that day. But God was good, and we just continued to have faith, and we waited, and the doctor had told us that this tumor was probably not going to be anything to worry about. It would be benign, because the one thing it could be was a hepatocellular carcinoma, but it wouldn't be malignant, so don't worry about it. The doctor laughingly told us it would take a 1 in a million kind of guy to have that kind of tumor at Trenton's age. Well, Trenton was our 1 in a million because it was a malignant hepatocellular carcinoma. So we were at UNMH for probably 2 weeks, and we came home, and about a week later I noticed Trenton was not feeling good and he was running a fever, so I took him to the ER here, and they redid the CT scan and they checked all of his vitals again and decided that he had an abscess on his liver, and so they flew him to Albuquerque. So once again, we were in the hospital for another 10 days. And the catch in all this, that Trenton was 16, and he was and is a very strong-willed young man, and he refused chemo. He said, I'm not going to have chemo. I know that the doctor got all of the tumors, so we are not going to have to go through the course of chemo. We got a email from this doctor out of Chicago that we had never heard of. And this doctor had just a different kind of news for us. He goes, we think 5 years ago that UNMH misdiagnosed this tumor, and it's not hepatocellular. He thinks it's fibroblast, which is a tragic cancer. It is kind of the brother of hepatocellular, because hepatocellular is actually an old people's disease. Young people don't get it, or they rarely, only if they're 1 in a million kind of a guy like Trenton. But fibroblast is how they classify it for young people, and it has a 100% recurrence rate and a 10% survival rate. And we were just devastated. Mike and I just held each other thinking, how are we going to get through this? The doctor in Chicago arranged for a mobile blood unit to come to Trenton's apartment and drew blood, and we had to sign new releases to release portions of the tumor that was being held at UNMH so that they could compare the results. And he said he would have an answer for us by the end of the month. So our scheduled FaceTime meeting was February the 3rd. And so we had that meeting, and he goes, I don't like to say I'm wrong, but I'm wrong. And Trenton actually does have the original diagnosis of hepatocellular, and it appears that there is no trace of it whatsoever. And so I like to think of it that the doctor wasn't necessarily wrong, but God was right. God was right when that little pickup rolled over and we found out that Trenton had a tumor that we would have went years before it was diagnosed. God was right as Trenton was bleeding out on the surgery table. God was right and God was there. Even though we couldn't see it, and we want to put everything in our human little box of this is the way it is and this is how God takes care of us, but God has strange ways of answering prayers. And all we know is that every step God has been with us. He's given us hope when there was very little hope. And now we have a 21-year-old son that is cancer-free, and we still pray for that boy every day because God has a purpose that we will maybe never know in our lifetime, but he was saved for a reason.